Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and today we are finally taking a look at the 737-800. It's basically the same principle as the 737-700, and so we're going to be comparing my Overkill's PDF tutorial guide for the 737, and we're going to be going through it page by page. We're even doing the exact same flight that is found in that particular document and seeing how closely the two aircraft match up and what kind of difficulties you have going from one to the other. If you are interested in acquiring any of my Overkill's tutorial guides for Microsoft Flight Simulator, please consider joining me on Patreon. Patreon subscribers level tier 2 and above have access to all of my guides, as well as any future updates and future guides that will be coming down the road. Link to Patreon can be found in the description below. Okay, everybody, so as I said, we're going to be going through my Overkill's PMDG 737 tutorial guide. Now, this was built around the 737-700. And so today we're going to be using this guide to fly the 800. And my purpose is one of two things. It is A, to see if I need to create a completely separate guide for the 800, or if the 700 will be sufficient enough to get new sim pilots into the 800 series aircraft and, get up and flying. Please keep in mind that, as it says right here on the cover page of the document, I'm not a 737 pilot. I'm not an expert. I am simply someone who started these guides a long time ago for my own ease of use to get into some of these aircraft. I remember what it was like getting started with a lot of these aircraft and making the jump from like general aviation over into the commercial aircraft can be quite daunting and very, very intimidating. And so that was my whole purpose of creating these guides. And then I sort of passed them around a little bit here and there and got a big hit. And next, boom, we are where we're at today. So my purpose is to first show that the similarities between the two aircraft are actually quite in par with the ease of use in simulation. And what I mean by that is that you can pretty easily switch from one aircraft to the other using the same documentation, the same procedures. Now, there are going to be some variances. There are going to be some imperfections. There's already imperfections in that guide. Like I said, I am not a real world pilot, so everything that I had to gather, all the information steps, are just things that I have found online through research and reading and talking to some of you all, and just trying to extrapolate the most important piece of information and bring them together. It is obviously an incomplete thing. Being a pilot is something that requires tons of research and education, and I don't have all of that. So I do want you guys to keep all of that in mind. And while we're at the topic, of course, I'm definitely going to give a shout out, guys, to all of my Patreon subscribers. Thank you so much for all of your patience and your encouragement and your support through all of these guides. They take a long, long time to put together. They really are a lot of work, especially when I'm starting an aircraft from scratch and I don't know the aircraft myself. So if you guys are interested in supporting the channel or acquiring any of my guides, as you guys saw in the intro, please consider joining me on Patreon. Levels tier 2 and above have access to all of the guides, including this one here. So what we are doing in this guide today is we are going to be following it page by page just about, and we're going from DFW, just as we're doing here in the documentation, and going over to Colorado Springs. Now, everything you need is in these guides, and all of my guides are built the same way. They are all from cold and dark at point A all the way to cold and dark at point B. And they all contain everything you need to complete the flight according to the guide itself. All of your charts are in there, all of the flight planning, weights requirements, wind requirements, anything that may be in there is already included. Now, the only thing I will not be doing today is adjusting the weather. I'm just going to be using live weather, and we'll adjust runways as necessary. But for the most part, we're going to be following it dead on down the line. My biggest concern isn't so much flight plan entry. That's going to be the same from just about any aircraft. It's going to be more on the startup and shutdown procedures and controlling the aircraft from there. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so jumping into the cockpit, we do have GSX installed. We're probably not going to be using it today. Again, that's sort of not the purpose of what I'm going for today's particular video. This is more supposed to be a tutorial base, so I really hope that this all goes well. And let's just see what happens here. Now, the reason why by the way, because I always get comments, the reason why I am not doing this off screen, the reason why I'm not testing it and then coming back to you is because two-part. One, I like to show the mistakes. I like to show the events that can happen going from one aircraft to the other. And two, so you guys know that, I'm just like you. I'm learning the same way everybody else is. Like I said, a lot I learned just as much from you guys as I hope you guys learn from me. So this is part of why I do this on the channel, is because a lot of you guys will come back and say, hey, Mike, you missed A, B, C, D, or A, B, C, D was great, but E, you might want to do this instead. And that's how I update the guides too. You guys are a great source of information too. So let the games begin. Now let's come on down. I'm going to go through the guides. And by the way, if you guys are interested, you guys can see here, we walk through a cockpit, start, or identifying screens, if you will. And then we're going to come all the way down to, I am looking for, oh, we have the PMDG setup. I've already done that. We already have the jetway connected. So we're done there. And it shows you how to save panel state. And now we're going to get into the pre-flight check. So let's get into that now. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to get that window off here. And we're going to make sure the landing gear handle is down. Actually, we need to get electrical power first. Let's do that. I missed that page. My fault, folks. So coming up to the top page here, we have battery on. Emergency exit lights are armed. Standby power is in auto. And let's see, emergency lights are armed. Engine electrical pumps, hydraulic pumps are, or electric hydraulic pumps, gosh, I can't talk today, are off. And left and right wipers are in the park position. So there is some differences in the overhead panel. In the 700 series, this is further over. You have a few more items here in the middle, but for the most part, we're still on par. Still again, and ground power is now enabled. All right, so we have ground power available. Now we're going to step on down to the front, making sure that's not our jetway moving. Oh, is that one way over there? What do we have over there? Is that an A380 or is that a 737? Not to get sidetracked. Or 747. What is it? Oh, it's a 787. Looks like the Dreamliner. Huh, cool. Anyway, sorry, sidetracked. All right, so let's get back down here. So now, landing gear lights, you have 3 green. You also have, let's come up top here, these lights up here that are backup if necessary. So if you have one bulb out that's showing here, you can cross-reference that with the overhead panel. Coming over here, making sure that the flat panel is in the retracted position and the gauge is showing accordingly as well. Making sure those two are matching up. Let's see here. I did different cameras on this one and I'm regretting it. Should have kept it the exact same as my other one. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is do a fault test. Make sure the fault and in-op lights illuminate. Then we're going to do a fire test. Oops, I didn't mean to go that way. All right. All fire lights are illuminating. Warning messages displayed. Master caution showed. Okay, and next we're going to come over here and test the extinguisher bottles. Actually, that's the overheat. I don't know why I was clicking on that. Here's your extinguisher bottles. 3 green for the left side. Check channel B. And 3 green indicating they're good and charged. Down to the next page here. Test the cargo heat. Okay, good. And let's step on back to the rear. Make sure the manual gear release handles are all down and that the door is closed and locked. And then here, come back to the pilot seat, peek overhead, and make sure that the emergency escape rope hatch is secure. You would then verify all of your circuit breakers, both behind the first officer and captain, are all in and secured. And let's step up to the overhead panel once again. We're going to start with the far rear. Flight recorder, put it in test position, make sure the light extinguishes. Back to the normal. Mach and airspeed warning. Bus 1. Number 2. Same thing with the stall warnings. Actually notice these take a minute before they will work. So we're going to come back to these. I'm thinking that these are in the wrong because the same thing happens on the 700 series. After the aircraft's been powered on for a minute, like good 5 to 8 minutes, these will suddenly be working. So I'm thinking that these are in a bad spot of the checklist. So I'm going to have to adjust that, but they're working. So then we can also come over to our IRS here and we're going to move them straight from off to a line, then over to nav. Same thing with number 2. There we go. And we can set our display as desired. If we want the windage, Want the heading and status, all that good jazz. Okay, then you can set your dome light. Typically, you want to set this on to at least dim if you are in night operations until after takeoff, because in the event that you have any kind of electrical failure within inside the cockpit, the dome light is going to be the only light that is still illuminated. So keep that in mind. It's a good practice to leave it on until you are clear from the takeoff and everything is working. So step back downstairs here. We clear the master caution once again. Now let's do an annunciator test. Lights test on, and the aircraft should light up like it is December 25th. It's Christmas. Make sure all of your lights are good. Obviously, I'm not checking every single one, but showing you guys the idea of how everything lights up. Okay, then we'll come on down and clear that. Clear the master caution. Okay, and then we're going to step on down to the oxygen, and you can see this little dauber right here. That's going to open up. It's a valve that's going to expand. You can see it open when we depress the test switch. When it opens, it indicates the oxygen is passing through the system and that the system is functioning. So press it just like that. And as long as that, again, that bubble opens up, you're good to go. Okay. So oxygen test complete. Lights tests are complete. Pre-flight check is done. Now it's time to start taking a look at fuel. Now, here's where things get a bit different, and this is where this actually is going to require a bit of a change for me, is the block fuel. So I am going to have to sort of make a secondary guide, but most of the procedures will probably still be the same. But we're going to have to do a very different sim brief. So let's go ahead and get over to sim brief and make some necessary adjustments. Okay, so getting back over to SimBrief here. Now we're just going to enter in the required information that I really need to get this done. You can fill out all of it if you want, but you don't have to. What we're mostly interested in is things like this. This is our reserve fuel. 45 minutes for any IFR flight. Obviously, we have a departure and arrival locations, and we need to make sure we select the correct aircraft. So we're going to be looking for the 737-800 now. That's a 787. That was the wrong one. I should have caught that by the -8. Where are you? There it is. 737-800. There we go. Okay. Now there are some much more accurate profiles available out there, but again, for simulation purposes, to get from A to B, the SimBrief default profile will probably suit us just fine. So don't feel like you have to go out and find that. Cost index, you can either leave that at auto or set that to a specific value of your choosing. This is basically, there's a lot more to it than this, but cost index is the fuel burn rate according to fuel cost and profit margin, things like that to the flight. There's a lot of things that go into it, but the long and short of it is the higher the number, the faster you fly, the more fuel you burn, the more expensive the flight for the company. So that's the general idea behind it. So you can set that to your desire. But again, especially if you're doing simulation here, okay, if you're just flying to have fun, you probably don't have to worry about this. But if you're doing something like a career add-on, you might want to pay attention to cost index. Okay, so departure runway, we're looking at 36 right. I don't think that's what I have in my guide, so I'm going to go back up to that for just a second here. I'm looking for the flight plan information, so give me just a minute here. I want to try to keep that the same if possible. 17 right and 17 left is what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and save that or change that. We're going to do 17 right. Yep. Just to keep all of that the same. And arrival, we're looking for 17 right. No, I don't think I was. Was it? 17 left on the arrival. My fault. There we go. There, just to keep those the same. Nothing changed there, but still. You never know. And then if you want extra fuel on top of what SimBrief already thinks that you need in order to complete the flight safely, you can add that if you choose, but I don't worry about that. Passengers and freight, I leave as is for the, just let SimBrief take care of it. Again, I'm more interested in the route, and I'm interested in the fuel. So at this point here, I'm going to go ahead and go up to the top and hit Generate Flight. Hit Yes. Okay, and I like to do the print PDF. It's much easier once you catch it in this format. Here we go. And there's our block fuel. So the block fuel definitely changed, because if we come back to our guide, just scroll down here to where we were getting to the fueling section. Almost. Almost. There we go. Yeah. So it takes 2,000 more pounds of fuel, essentially, is what we're getting. Like about 2,100 more pounds, 2,200. So good to know. Good to know. So let's go ahead and get that on board here, the aircraft. Get that on board here, the aircraft. What the hell is wrong with me? All right, so stepping on down. Now, again, there's two different ways that you can do this. For what I'm doing today, I just want to get the fuel on the aircraft. Not going to worry about anything else yet. So we're just going to go to fuel menu here. And from here, we can instantly change the fuel that's on the aircraft. So we're not going to go through the refueling process of calling the truck and all that. We're just getting stuff done. Damn it. 356, right? 17356. Yep. So drop that in there. Boom. Saw the aircraft shake a little bit. Lets us know that we got our fuel on board. And then from here, the other thing that I'm going to want is payload while we're here. Total payload is going to be 40.3 passengers, 175. So now we're going to come back and we're going to go to payload. Here we got our total passengers. We don't have a first class on this flight, so we are doing 175 passengers. Drop them in there. Boom, the aircraft's loaded. Just, again, saw it bounce a little bit. And then cargo, we have 9.6 thousand pounds. Now we obviously want to try to balance that out between the two. So let me think about this. Well, it's half of 9,000, 4,500, and then 0.6. So what would that be? About 4,800, 4,700 each side. It's not quite 9.6, but I'm going to just drop it down a little bit just to make things easy for the math today. Okay. That'll put us at 9,400. So 200 up. Guess I could have done 4,800. All right. Well, now that I feel like an idiot, let's go ahead and just change that. I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, wow, that was only 200 shy of what we needed. I guess I could add 200 more, huh? Okay, 9,600 pounds. There we go. So we got it forward and aft. Cargo's balanced. Aircraft's weighted. Aircraft is fueled. We're good to continue. So go back to our checklist and let's continue on down the line. Okay, so now we are into the FMC configuration. Okay, so I said FMC. I actually meant to say FMS. You guys are going to find that I am constantly bouncing between Airbus and Boeing phraseology. Just forgive me because it's probably not going to stop. I just have to be honest at this point. I've done my best and it's just, not going to happen. Okay, so we do have an issue with nav data being out of date that should not affect today's flight. Now, if you guys need to update this, for example, if you have a Navigraph subscription, the Navigraph data manager will update the PMDG aircraft independently. So do keep that in mind. It can be updated. It shouldn't affect us for this flight. The air rack, I don't believe, has changed. So if it does, we'll deal with that then. But up at the top, we still have the same information that we see in the 700 series. You have the 737-800. We have our engine thrust performance rating, 26,000 pounds of thrust. You have your current air rack data, 2204, which is valid from April 21st to May 19th of 2022. So this is very outdated on this particular one. You have your operating OS version. So this is the actual OS for the FMC, which is the 0038 for MSFS, actually version 3.00. If you guys feel like reading that, I don't. Okay, so now let's move on to the fun stuff. Let's go over to the position initialization. Set IRS position as long as you have turned your IRS on, okay? And it's actually set to, it's currently still aligning, actually. So what we actually could do, because I don't really, again, I'm not interested in waiting today because I just want to get through this with you guys. So actually what we're going to do is go to PMDG setup, options. I think it's simulation. Let's take a look. I haven't had to mess with this in quite a lot. IRS options. And we want, it says fast 30 seconds, but we're just going to set it to instant. There we go. There we go. And then you could save the PMDG configuration. I'm not going to worry about that just right now. But then when we go back up, interesting, it's still showing a line, but that's the quality. Actually, that should be the timer, I believe. Let me come down here and see if that goes away when we set it in the FMC. I don't think it should still be flashing. So we're going to go to the next page. And we always take the GPS left. I don't know why, but that's just what we do. So I'm just going to grab this top line here, copies it to the scratch pad, go back to the previous page, and drop it in there. Okay, now if we come back up, that's all it was the FMC. Okay, fair enough. Shows how often that I stick my head up there. Maybe that's a bad thing. Okay, in reference airport, you can type this in here, but you do not have to at this point. But like you could do the KDFW if you want. Nope, clear one. Man, that jetway just keeps going on and on, doesn't it? So I'm going to drop that in there. You can put your gate in here. If it doesn't recognize the gate position, it'll just tell you doesn't know it, basically, but I don't worry about that. So let's move on to our next segment, which is the route. Now, here's where things get interesting. We do have to type KDFW. Oop. I was just about to say, since we put it on the previous page, automatically puts it in the scratch pad, so you can drop that up there. Now we're going to go KCOS for Colorado Springs, drop it into your destination. Here's where you can do the fun stuff, enter in your flight number. So we're going to do Southwest Airlines. I don't know. Let's do 5201. Sure. Why not? Right? Company route. If you had a saved route, you could be able to select it from here and it'll automatically load the information for the route in here. Same thing if we want to do the flight plan request and we were doing a SimBrief integration. Today, because of the nature of what we're doing, we're going to be entering everything in manually. So we're not going to do any of those. But if you had a SimBrief integration, here's where you would request it and enter that in. So now we are on the route page. So let's get on into that at this point. So I'm going to go back to our flight plan that we were looking at on SimBrief, the one that we just recently created. So let's see here. There we go. All right, so now let's start entering in our route. Here's our route here. So obviously the departure is KDFW using runway 17 right, the Logan 8 departure or SID, and using the Rolls transition, jumping onto the Juliet 52 airway, jumping off at Label, I believe that one is, direct to Lamar, if I'm not mistaken, jumping onto the Aussie 5-star or standard terminal arrival route into Colorado Springs for the 17 left approach. So let's get back into the aircraft and figure out how to enter all this in. So the first thing we're going to do now that we're on the route section is, and you can do this anytime, you don't have to go to the route page, but we're going to go to departures and arrivals. Obviously, we are departing from KDFW, so we're going to select that line there. Here's where we go to the next page and find our Logan 8. There it is, Logan 8 there. Remember, we determined that we're using the Rolls transition, and we are departing from 17 right. So select that there. And we can go ahead and hit execute if you want. You don't have to. You'll be hitting it again, but we'll go ahead and throw that in there. And at this point, we'll go back to the route page. There's the Logan 8, going to Rolls, using the Rolls transition. And from Rolls, we are now going on to the rest of the section. Remember, we are jumping onto the Juliet 52. Airways will always be on the left. So Juliet 52 and going to Lima Bravo Limo. Nemo! And then from Label, I think this is, like I said, I can't remember what the hell that is. I'd have to go back and look. I could find it, but I haven't yet. And by the way, actually, what the hell, I'll show you guys where you get that. You can typically find these, okay? If you scroll down to the detailed route. Let's see here. That's on, as long as it's, oh, maybe not. Oh, there's Lamar. I was right about that. Liberal. I'm sorry. Liberal is the name of this one right there. Okay. And then we are going direct to Lamar. At least I was right about Lamar. Now, anytime you're doing a direct, you don't have to put anything on the left. So we're just going to put LAA for Lamar and drop that in over there. Now, here's where you have to look. If you have more than one location or more than one entry in the nav system with the same name, you'll get this. Okay, so we have to figure out which one that we're actually going to. And again, we can go back to our flight plan here and we can find it there. So let's see here, Logan 8 once again. There's direct to Lamar, and what we're going to be looking at is here. Here's our longitude and latitude coordinates. And let's see here. I'm looking at the screen. Don't worry, I'll show you guys in just a second. There it is. Okay, so pay attention to the west 10241 and north 3811. And that's going to be our top line here. 3811.8 and 10241. So we know this is a VOR DME, and that's the one that we're looking for. So the names aren't the same, but the initials here inside the nav computer are the same. So we're just going to select the top one for Lamar, which we could have done that right from the start, but I wanted to show you guys how to also find it through the longitude and latitude if you need to verify it, because there are some that do have the same name. And then going back to our route for a second up top, from here we are jumping onto the Aussie 5. So here we're done, so we can go ahead and hit activate. Now you can hit execute again, but we're not done yet. We're still going to go to departures and arrivals. Now normally you would hit your arrival if you're using an ATC service or something like that. You probably wouldn't enter your arrival in until you got clearance from the arriving airport, but we're not using ATC today. We're just jumping right into it. So here we're going to be jumping onto the Aussie 5. We know that Lamar is our transition point, and we are using the ILS 17 left. Now, inside the guide, I do go through the approach charts and star charts showing you guys why we pick our transitions and why they are what they are. For today, I'm just going to ask you to trust me, and we're going to keep on going. Okay? Okay, so everything is good there. Oh, we do need the addon transition. I'm sorry. That's onto the approach. So I do need that. All right, let us continue onward, my friends. So let's go to the route. Our route is now entered. Now you can do a couple of different things. We can go to the legs page. And then we can come down here and move our PFT display over to plan. Set your range if you'd like, inward or outward. And here's a good time to look for discontinuities or any waypoints that just make you go, does that really belong there? And what we're going to do is just select the step button here, and we can step through each leg of the flight. And we're just looking for anything, like I said, that stands out that makes you go, this doesn't belong, or we're looking for a break in the flight plan, which would be a discontinuity. There's our approach. There, and the blue line is your missed approach. For any reason we have to call a missed approach, we'll basically come out, we'll deviate, come on out over here, and back to addon to restart the approach and come back in. Cool. All right, so from here, that back to map. And the route is now complete. Okay, so moving on with the rest of the configuration, we go back to the route page. It'll take us back to the flow, if you will. So at this point, we're going to go over to performance initialization. Now you got 2 pages of this. Most of it, as long as you are fully fueled, your cargo has been loaded onto the aircraft, and your passengers are on board, this gets very, very easy. So the final reserves, first off, let's start entering some of this information here. Actually, the cost index, what we're going to need first. So going back to our Simbri flight plan, cost index is going to be right here. So you can see we have a cost index of 13. The other thing that we're going to want is the reserves. And the reserves, you're going to take your final reserves and your alternate fuel, add them together, and you get 6.1. And that's what we're going to be entering in onto the FMC. So let's get back over here. Again, cost index we saw was 13. We'll drop that in there. 6.1 on the reserves. 0 fuel weight, just give it a click. Automatically calculates it. Put it back in there. And you can see it also calculated the gross weight. Cruise altitude. We are cruising today at 34,000 feet. So flight level 340 is what we're looking for. So we're going to drop that in. Oh, wrong line. Sorry. Cruise and wind. So what we're going to look here is we're going to go back to our flight plan. And we're going to find our top of climb. So here's the TOC, top of climb. And we're going to find our winds, which is going to be 239 at 25 knots. So back to our simulator. 239 is the wind direction. 25 knots is the wind speed. Put that in there. And we can hit execute. That's all in. Next page. Yeah, we don't need anything there. Not required. And we're going to go to N1 limit. Now, I still have not found the correct way to set the N1 limit for the Boeing series aircraft. So we're just going to leave it at toga being maximum thrust, which is fine because it's really fun and it makes it climb like a rocket. So it really does make it cool. So from here, we're just going to move straight onto the next page, which makes things easier. Takeoff, we're going to be doing takeoff flaps 5. We'll almost always be doing flaps 5 unless you're on wet conditions or short runway or you are very, very heavy. But for pretty much all that I can think of, you'll be using flaps 5. Center of gravity, you're just going to automatically calculate that, throw it in there, and then we're going to set our trim at 5.89. So let's back up to the trim wheel here. from here, just hold that down arrow and wait for the arrow to hit approximately 5.8. So there's 5. And now we are looking for... That's good enough for me. Cool. So we've got our trim set. Now lock in our V speeds. 142 for V1, the speed at which the takeoff can no longer be aborted. You must get the aircraft off the ground. 144 knots will be our rotation speed, the point we start pulling back on the yoke and bringing that nose up. And 151 V2, which is the speed at which, if we were to lose a single engine, the aircraft would continue to climb and accelerate. So let's go ahead and take our V2, add 10 knots to it, and all that does is just makes for a slightly better performing climb. So we're going to put 162 knots in here. Some companies use 5, some companies use 15. It really just depends on the situation. Some don't use any plus at all. I'm putting 162 in here because, like I said, the plus 10 knots just sort of brings a higher performing takeoff. All right, and I just noticed that the speed brakes are armed. Oh, anti-skids aren't. I'm sorry. I thought that said speed brake. Wow. I need to get my glasses on. That was lame. Anyway, coming down. Glossing over. Same thing here. You can put in your runway slope, runway wind, and all that good stuff. I don't worry about it. It's not necessary for simulation purposes. At least for this skill level of a flight, if you will. If that makes more sense. But that does complete the FMC configuration, which means we can get on to getting ready for pushback and getting the engine started. All right, let's get the pre-started complete. So we are now going to come back to the overhead panel. We're going to start working our way through the flow here. We're going to start by turning the yaw damper on. Moving our way down to the navigational control, make sure that all switches are set to the normal position. Coming down, make sure all fuel pumps are turned on. Test the crossfeed. Light should go high blue, dim, and then now let's set it back to off. We should go high blue and then off. Okay. Set our amp meter to either the batteries. And soon we're going to set this to the APU as we're getting ready to start this here. We're going to make sure the cabin utility switches are on, seatbelt and passenger signs are on as well. Moving to my next page here. Equipment cooling switches, we're going to make sure are set to the normal position. Same thing with the exhaust. Making sure that your wipers are still in the park position. At this point, as long as the aircraft is fully fueled and is no longer being fueled, we can now set our seatbelt signs to on and chime the cabin. Emergency exit lights, we've already verified are armed, and we can press the attend light. Lady in the cabin know we're getting ready to go. We can now set our pressurization. We're going to pressurize the aircraft for 34,000 feet. Now, obviously, this doesn't happen at once. It will happen as we climb gradually, but we do want to program that. And landing elevation. Now, this is a terrible location that I picked for this, but it is 6,200 feet, and it's actually almost 63, so we're going to put 6,250. And this sucks later on because of setting the minimums on the barometric pressure. Or on the barometric altitude, excuse me. And you want to make sure that the pressurization system is set to the auto position. And we can now set our lights. Position lights we want in the steady position. You can turn your wing lights on as necessary. And we're also going to turn the anti-collision lights on a little early as we're getting ready to start the APU. And then the engines shortly afterwards. So now let's go ahead and start the APU. Click down to on and then click the start. Should see the exhaust temperature from the APU start to rise. It'll go to about 900 and then come back and settle down between 500 and 600. There we go. Low oil pressure indicating the APU is now running, or rolling, I should say. While that's happening, we're going to step downstairs to the flight control panel, and we're going to make sure that both flight directors are on, starting with the captain side first. As you can see, it is the master. If we do the other way around, you can see the MA comes on over here on the first officer side. So we want to make sure captain side first, then the first officer. Set our departure runway course line, and final heading. So we're going to go for 176 degrees. Oop, wrong way. There we go. And same thing with our heading. And we'll go ahead and set the other side just to be consistent. Perfect. And we're going to set our initial altitude today. We're looking for 12,000 feet. Now this would be whatever you were cleared to by ATC if you were using ATC. I'm going to verify our barometric pressure. 299.3 is what we're showing today. Set the RTA brakes down to RTO for rejected takeoff. And I'm looking for the rear panel. I promise we're getting there. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and set our transponder code. Whoa. Okay, here. And we're just going to sort of make something up. Sure, 6224. And we're just going to turn it on. Altitude reporting off while we're on the ground. I should say while we're on the taxiway or on the ramp. Barometric pressure, set it to either inches or hectopascals, depending on which one is your preference. Why are you not cooperating? Oh, because I'm hitting the wrong button. Okay, and from here you can hit the system button. So check your current hydraulic pressure and availability. Doesn't look like it's quite functioning yet, so we're going to go back to the MFD, but that is a step we would take, and we'd verify the quantity and the pressure. And then what we'll do here is now we'll test the flight controls and verify that we get some certain alerts here in a minute. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to push the throttles forward, and we're actually looking for an alarm. We should get a takeoff configuration alarm. And there it is. That says takeoff config. And what that lets us know is that the aircraft has been pushed to a takeoff thrust, but it is not ready for takeoff. All right, so now that that's done here, we're also going to make sure the parking brake is pulled. Okay, so to set the parking brake, this is actually a relatively new development with PMDG. We need to depress the brakes, then set the brake, and we can release the pedals. Okay. All right, so we got that all set and squared away. Parking brakes are set, and I actually should have done that before I did the thrust test, but you know, whatever. And we want to make sure that your speed brake is disarmed. Okay, and then coming back here to the rear, if I can remember again which ones I want to make sure that your stabilator trims are in the normal position. Again, we already did set the transponder, and then if you go to the far back, you want to make sure your rudder trims are in the neutral position. And then to check your aileron trim, you will come right here and look at the top of the yoke. And if you are trimmed one direction or the other, the yoke will actually be turned said direction. So it makes it real easy to at least determine your ailerons. All right, so that's the pre-pushback check, if you will. Let's go ahead and go upstairs and switch our power over to the APU. Here's our APU buses here. So there's the left one. There's the right one, and we can now disconnect ground power now that we're under the APU. So ground power is disconnected, and let's see where we are at. All right, so packs are in the off position. We do want to make sure that that is set. Anti-collision lights are already on. APU bleed, we want to make sure this gets turned on. If you ever try to start your engines and you know that everything's all set and you can't figure out why they will not turn over, chances are you forgot to turn the APU bleed on. I've done it more than once. It's really annoying and you feel epically dumb when you do it. But just know that it happens to everyone. There was no one who was innocent to this one. Okay? All right. So now we are ready for pushback and we're ready for engine start. So we're going to go ahead and get things going. Again, make sure that your packs are off and that the APU bleed is on. Everything else, we should be good to go. Quick correction, guys, before we get pushing back, I made a bit of a mistake. Now, this is why my guide is very helpful to even me, and this is actually why I started making them. I accidentally skipped a page on my guide, and I was wondering, because I noticed all of these were still on, and I was like, they shouldn't be. So, first thing, I skipped a page. It is in the documentation. I just accidentally rolled too fast. So, we're going to turn our window heats on. The probe and anti-ice, you can actually turn these on after engine start if you want, or in this case, we're going to leave them in the auto position for now. Wing ice and engine anti-ice, if you do need those, if you're in icing conditions, obviously you can turn those on at this point. The big ones is the electric hydraulic pumps. Those can come on now as well, and those actually could come on before we set the APU. Okay, and before turning the APU bleed on, we would have the packs in the auto position, cooling out the back of the cabin, making sure our passengers are comfortable while we are continuing the pre-flight. So again, I skipped a page. My apologies. Okay, so let's get going out of here. Now, I'm actually going to be using the Pushback Express. Like I told you guys, I was not going to be using GSX today. It does require a bit more hands-on. It looks cooler. It's badass, but GSX just keeps things a bit easier. So we're going to do pre-planned pushback here. Or, did I say GSX? I meant Pushback Express. I can't remember what I said now. Oops. So we're going to load that up. And let's see here. I believe... I hope I'm turning us the right direction. If not, we'll have to turn around via the taxiways, but it'll happen. Click there. I'm going to hit enter. All right, we got that rolling. Got everything figured out there. Let's go ahead and get the engine started. So we're going to come up top. We're going to start with the right engine, set it down to the ground position. Monitor the N1 rotation. N2, excuse me. We're looking for 20%. Excuse me, 25%. I almost forgot. And bring some fuel in. And she should start rolling. It's like we're going to be taking off in some nasty weather today. Alright, the pushback is complete. Let's reset that parking brake. There we go. Engine 2 is ready. Really? Really? What the hell did I just say? Let's start engine 1. Alright, so engine 1, master switch over to the ground position. Again, looking for 25%. While we're waiting there, we'll come up top. Taxi light can come on. We're going to take engine 2 and move it over into the continuous position. Getting dark outside, we're going to turn the wheel well lights off or on and the logo lights as well. Add those to the party. 25% on engine 1, inducing fuel. There she goes. Good engine start. And we're just waiting for that left engine. There it goes automatically to the off position. Set it over to continuous. At this point now we can turn generator 2 on. Takes the power from the APU and brings onto the engine generators. We'll go ahead and switch that over to engine 1 as well. And with both the generators now on, we can also turn off the APU. And we're going to set our amp meter to either Gen 1 or Gen 2, whichever you prefer. We can also turn our packs back to the auto position. APU bleed can now come off. Engine bleed now comes on. Isolation valve goes to the auto position. And the left circulatory fan and right circulatory fan go to the auto position as well. And this is another one of the differences between the 700 and 800 series that we'll actually have to make an adjustment to. So for the most part, the guide seems to be working very well. There are going to have to be some adjustments. But it definitely will get us airborne. Alright, so APUs are off, anti-ice are set as required. Autopilot trim are set. Set flaps for takeoff position. We're looking, there's flaps 1, flaps 2, going for flaps 5. And we'll verify that we get that with our gauge here as well. Cutoff levers are in the idle position. Flaps are now sent to the correct detint. Cast messages are all clear. We can do a recall. Lights test. All good. No warnings. Headings are set. Course is set. V2 speeds are set. Initial altitude is set. Transponder is on. Taxi lights are set. Runway turnoff lights not required as of yet. Change the lower display and hit the engine button. This will clear the display. The reason why we do this is if there is any kind of error or fault that happens from this point forward, it will automatically appear on the screen. So it's a good annunciator to say, hey, there's something going on. You need to address this because you cleared the screen, so it shouldn't be anything there. All right, so at this point, we're going to go ahead and taxi out to our runway. All right, so once again, depressing the brakes automatically releases the brake handle, adding some thrust in. Oh, just realized where I parked us. Remember I told you guys I backed us out the wrong direction, so I sort of give myself a more than unusual taxi route out where I should have gone. That's alright. It happens. So from this point we want to try to keep our ground speed below 10 knots when making any kind of turn. Here's our ground speed listed here. You can also find it in here as well. 20 to 25 knots is normal taxi speed as long as you don't have any kind of obstructions or any kind of dangers in the taxiway. As long as you're going in a straight line, everything's nice and clear, you should be good to taxi at about 20 to 25 knots. As we are approaching another turn, I'm going to keep it pretty slow. Nvme here. All right, and we have quite a long taxi down to the very end of this taxiway, so I'll see you guys in just a couple minutes. Okay, so we are approaching here 17 right. Two things. We are likely taking off with a slight tailwind. No, that is not how this should be done. I am keeping it that way just to keep the information, the tutorial guide, as close and accurate to the video as possible. This is why at the very beginning of the PDF guide, I do have you set manual weather. That way it matches the guide through and through. So please keep in mind, I do understand that will slightly affect our takeoff performance, but all we're doing here in this particular video is looking to say, does the PDF tutorial guide still work with the 737-800? And then just flying the 800. So it will be a little weird, but we should still be okay. So we're going to step to the back here. We're going to make sure that our transponder is set to TARA. Basically, it's a transmit and receive. It's traffic of, let's see here. Traffic Avoidance Resolution Awareness is what TARA stands for. And that's for basically, so traffic awareness lets you or alerts you of other traffic, air traffic that is in the area. Resolution, traffic avoidance. Resolution awareness. Resolution awareness tells you, basically enunciates what the aircraft needs to do in order to avoid a collision. So, anyway, let's move up top. Gosh, I can't talk today, guys. I'm so sorry. I don't know why. Runway turnoff lights can now come on. The weather's pretty crappy outside. Landing lights, both are left and right, are on. Position lights will go to the steady and strobe position as well. And then everything else, we're going to make sure we are completely clear of any amber lighting. No amber lighting in the area, which is good. No alerts. I always like to do a quick power up to 40%, then back off. Remember, we got that takeoff configuration alert earlier. If you advance the throttles past the 40% position, that is when you should see that. So, landing lights are on, strobes are on, flaps are set, aircraft's in a takeoff configuration. We can go ahead and take the runway at this point. Assuming that it's obviously safe to do so and the area is clear. Go ahead and line up here. Again, yes, I am aware we are doing a tailwind. No, this is not standard procedure, and we would likely be taking off from the other direction, but that would also cause me to completely change my flight route. I don't want to. So we're just going to risk it. So off we go here. First, we're going to stabilize at about 40%. That's about 50% there, and then I'm going to push the throttles forward. Oh, we are not set. There's a master caution right there. Let's make sure the auto throttles are armed. We're also going to arm the LNAV. There we go. And now I'm going to release the brakes. Push the throttles forward. And PMDG always adds this little screw. That is toga. And we are on our way. Cross tracked. Hands off the throttle. Rotating. Approximately 3 degrees per second.
Positive rate of climb.
Gear up. Activating that VNAV. And we're going to go with Command A. Autopilot has control. Flaps, going to flaps 2. Should be approaching the flaps 1 speed. I like to get there a little bit beforehand. From here, we're just going to sit tight on the flaps 1. There's the flaps 1, coming back. Going to flaps up. Like I said, I normally stay a little bit ahead of the curve there. Auto brake and go to the off position. We're airborne. Gear will come down to the off position. And go ahead and increase our altitude up to 24,000 feet, simulating clearance. I didn't realize I'd already done that. So at some point, my speed brake should have been armed before takeoff. I did not check that annunciator, so that's on me. I had set it while I was taxiing, and I'm guessing that I bumped the lever on my throttle and took it out of the armed position. I should have caught that. I should have checked my annunciator before. I'm actually kind of surprised I didn't get a takeoff configuration warning, but maybe that doesn't apply for the rejected takeoff. But that's something I should have done. So at this point, at 10,000 feet, we're going to make sure that we turn our landing lights off. At this point, the taxi light, runway, turn-off lights can come off. Getting into clearer skies, which is nice. So 10,000 feet, like I said, landing lights off. 18,000 feet. Make sure our barometric pressure is switched over to the standard position simply by depressing this standard button here. And then we will continue our climb up to cruise altitude. So I will see you guys when we get to cruise. Where we start talking about planning for the descent. Okay, so 10,000 feet, landing lights off. 18,000 feet, pressure set to standard, and that is only in the United States, as that is our transition altitude. Make sure you know the transition altitude for your particular region of flight. I'll catch you guys in a few minutes. One quick note that I did forget is you can also set your engine start switches to the off position. Verify the aircraft is pressurizing according to altitude and difference from outside pressure. And then you also want to make sure that you are burning fuel relatively evenly. If you notice a massive difference between the two tanks, that is something to be concerned about. This, we're looking at about 30-pound difference. Nothing too crazy, but we'll keep an eye on it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we've been up at cruise for a couple minutes here, but not too long here. Now you can see I've got my display range set at 120 miles. That's right up here, guys. And what I really love about the PMDG series of aircraft, and even now with the A320, we have the same thing, but now we have a top of descent calculator. It already knows what our descent point is. It already has the AirRack information in it as well that we were talking about earlier. But I'll show you guys some things on Navigraph charts that way we can make sure that we double check as we get into things. So let's go to the top screen here for just a minute here. Now you can see here is the navigational chart, and again, this is in the guide, guys. It's all here for you. We can see that we have some altitude restrictions. We have flight level 280 by this point, 270 here, 230 here. When you have a line above and below the altitude, that means you must be at that altitude. Okay, if the line is just below it, it means you must be above it. If the line is only above the altitude, it means you must be below that altitude. Here we have to be at these specific altitudes. So we are going to double check that one and make sure that we have that right. Now, in most cases in the United States, and by the way, guys, I've gotten a lot of pushback for this, and I have now checked. I actually contacted the FAA and got a final answer on this. Unless it is specifically stated somewhere in a chart or specific instructions from air traffic control in the United States, below 10,000 feet, you are restricted to 250 knots. It is not 240. Again, I actually made a call to the Federal Aviation Administration and got a solidified answer, as well as looked up the actual law itself. He actually gave me the chapter and everything. I actually have that in comments in one of my videos. I'll try to remember to put it in this one. There's a lot of information I'm already putting in this one, but it is something that keeps coming up. A lot of people say, I think you're mistaken for Europe, blah, blah. It's 240. No, it is not. FAA is 250 knots in the United States below 10,000 feet unless specifically stated or directed otherwise. So I wanted to throw that out there because it comes up in almost every video that I mention that in. But so normally at 10,000 feet, we are required 250 knots. Here at Aussie, though, this is a perfect example of this, is we are required to be at 14,000 feet at 250 knots. So we're required to slow down much earlier here. And that has to do with the elevation of the airport. The elevation of the airport is 6,300 feet, just shy of it. So that's really only a 4,000, or excuse me, an 8,000 foot difference there. So that makes sense. We're below the 10,000 foot mark down to the touchdown. So that kind of makes sense. So we have to watch for these kind of things. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back down to the FMS and make sure that it matches what we see here. So let's go ahead and do that for a second. We got quite a bit of things that we're going to do ahead of time to make sure that we are where we need to be. So we're going to go to the legs page and start confirming some of this stuff. So at Lamar, we need to be at flight level 280. You can see we do have that there. At Tull, 270. HIMS, we need to be at 230. Looks good. Let's keep on going down here. 17,000.
Descend.
Why are you telling me to descend? Oh, we have a traffic cautionary avoidance. That's funny. We're not going to worry about that. Not for this video, but that is kind of cool that it's working. 25. I'm going to switch the TCAS off for just a minute, guys, so we can keep this fight. That's really cool that it's working, but for the sake of this video, I don't want to engage in that. So we're just going to set that as such and then come back up here. We'll deal with the TCAS later. So anyways, at Aussie, there we go. We need to be at 250 knots at 14,000 feet. So that's good that it does have the restriction already set. And this is what I was saying earlier about the nav data being out of date when we first started the aircraft up, that it wasn't a huge concern to me, as I was pretty sure that the AirRack data hadn't changed for this particular flight. So we did get lucky there. That's all correct. Okay, so we've made sure all of our restrictions are in place. The aircraft should honor all of that, which is really awesome stuff here. So let's keep on going here. I do want to step upstairs for a second because I'm sort of questioning myself. Touchdown zone elevation for this particular location is 6187. So actually we only need to be at 6,200 feet. Never be below landing elevation. You want to be above it. So touchdown zone elevation, like I said, is 6,187 feet. I'll show you guys where I'm looking here in just a second. Again, it's in the guide. There it is right there. 6187. So we need to set our landing elevation to be above that altitude. In our case, we're going to set that to 6,200 feet. Okay, so we have that labeled out. We know our final approach course is 172 degrees. We are way ahead of schedule here, guys. I am doing this strictly for your benefit. So we're going to set that down to 172, 172, and we can even turn our final heading. Again, this is way ahead of schedule. One other thing that I do want to point out that I forgot to put in the recording, so I switched that back. The bank angle, we need to make sure that we restrict this to 10 degrees above 30,000 feet. The reason why is above 30,000 feet is the air gets super thin, right? The less dense the air is, the less air that's actually coming over the control surfaces of the aircraft. In that kind of thin air environment, if you put the aircraft into a high bank, you run the risk of a wing stall. We obviously don't want that. So we restrict the bank angle to 10 degrees. That way we further reduce the likelihood of a wing stall and scaring the hell out of all of your passengers, right? Now, chances are the aircraft would absolutely recover from even a wing stall up at this altitude, but we probably don't want to put them through that particular situation. And I'm sure you would get a phone call or two from your company management if that were to take place. Once we descend below 30,000 feet, we can set that bank angle back to 25 degrees or 30 degrees if that's your preference. Okay? Okay. Anyways, let's keep on going and continuing onward with our settings here. All right, so I'm walking through my chart. So we've already talked about the top of descent, so we do have that. So now let's start talking about some further windage information. So let's go back to SimBrief for just a minute. So first, if we take a look at our guide here, we can see that we have, at each of these waypoints, we have a flight level, we have the wind speed. Now, we're going to program a few of these into the computer, and the idea is just to give us a little bit better performing descent. As the more information we give the computer, the more accurately, more smoothly it can calculate the descent profile. So let's go to our current SimBrief flight plan, so that way we can have the correct information. So we're going to switch back over here. Now, we know that our cruising altitude today is 34,000 feet. So we're going to find our 34,000 feet, and we're going to find the last one. So here it is right here. We have Aussie, okay, up at, that's going to be HIMS. Let's call it HIMS, is what we're going to use as our descent profile here. So, excuse me, had a yawn that snuck up on me. So we're going to be taking the wind up at that particular altitude. And again, if we go back to our guide, you know, it's going to be this number here, and then we're going to take this one here. And so this is actually the altitude, excuse me, and then this is the wind information. So we're going to take the altitude here. Here's 340. So then we're going to grab 340. We're going to grab the winds 027 at 26 knots. Then we're going to use, let's see here. Yeah, let's use 23,000. We're just going to round it off, 23,000, 028 at 27. And let's take, we're going to go ahead and take the 15,000. So 15,000 feet at 340 at 25 knots. Okay, and what we're going to do with those is we're going to come back down to our FMC, and we're going to enter in some of this information here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our descent page. Here it is here. Okay. Now, if you wanted to descend at a different speed, so here's the speed, here's the restriction. So remember, for example, we can change this. 250 at 10,000 feet is what my restriction. That's 1,000. We want 10,000. So I'm gonna throw that in there so the aircraft flies a little faster through that particular zone. You can change that there by doing so. Okay, it gives you your top of descent and all that good jazz. You can see, so our top of descent is currently 192 miles away. We're gonna go to the forecast, and here's where we're gonna do a couple different things here. So we're going to do our altitudes that we just talked about. So going back to SimBrief here, we're going to do 340. Okay, so we're just going to type 340 here. Drop it up there. And we're going to put the wind speed or direction speed. So the last one we were using was HIMS, 027 at 26 knots. So 027 for 26. We're going to put that one in there. And then we were using Hugo, which was 23,700. So we can even do 24,000. I'm going to round it up a little bit. 24,000 and 028 for 27. 028 for 27. Got those over there. And the last one we're going to grab is 15,000 feet. So we're just going to round it down to 15,000 even. And we're doing 340 at 25. Those are the calculated winds at those particular locations. Drop those in there. And again, that's just going to help make things just a little bit smoother. Something too crazy. A few other things we could do. We could do the outside air temperature deviation, the QNH according to the airfield. But I'm not going to go that far. Okay, and let's go on to the next section because there's something else cool that I want to show you guys that we do for the approach. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to make some very cool guidance rings or alert rings, if you will, just some visual representation on the PFD of your distance to your desired airport. And it's really helpful when you're learning the aircraft and you're starting to get your approach flows down, sort of as reminders. Okay, by this ring, I need to be this configured. By this ring, I need to be configured like such, right? And you guys will see what I'm talking about here in a little bit. But we're going to go to the fix page, and we're just going to type in our runway for our arrival. So in our case, we're going to type in runway 17 left. It already knows where we're going. So we just need to type in 17 left, throw that in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create some rings around the airport. So I'm going to create a ring at 5 miles. I'm going to create a ring at 10 miles. And I'm going to do another one at 15. And again, these are just reminders. These are going to be visual cues of, hey, we're getting close. Hey, I'm inside this ring. I need to get my crap together. Make sure I'm configured. Where are my flaps at? What's my speed at? Do I need to start thinking about a missed approach? Excuse me. Okay, so these are just super helpful. That's all there is to it. This is all we're doing is just sort of figuring out where we're at here. Okay, now, let's go ahead and start figuring out what kind of fuel expectation, weight expectation we can sort of expect at arrival. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sort of guesstimate, anticipate what our final landing weight will be so we can start doing some of the final landing configurations. When you guys are learning, I highly recommend, no matter what aircraft it is, do things ahead of time as much as possible, and it reduces a lot of that stress as you start coming down. So what we're looking at is we have Colorado Springs right here, and we have our estimated fuel quantity on board by the time we reach that particular destination. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to take this number and we're going to use that to sort of figure out where we're going to be. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the initial reference. Remember 11 tons, okay, or 11,000 pounds. We're going to come over here. You can see our current gross weight is 147. What we're going to do is we're going to take 11,000 pounds off of that, and we're going to guesstimate that. So that's going to be 136 is what we're going to type in there. And we're going to drop that in there. And then we can hit our flaps 30 is going to be our landing configuration. Tap that again. That puts that down in there. Now this is just configuration information, so it doesn't have to be on exact. That's still going to be pretty close. That's what should our guesstimate be. And so we know that our flaps 30 is going to be our configuration, and our final approach speed should be at approximately 144 knots. Okay, so makes it very, very easy. Again, allows us to get a little bit ahead of the game and make sure that we're configured for landing. The next thing we're going to do is configure the landing radios, meaning our ILS. So we're going to step on downstairs here for just a minute, come over to the ILS radio, and we need to enter the ILS frequency, which in this particular case, if we go back to our guide, you can see there at 109.1 with a final approach course of 172 degrees, which we have already set. So we're going to come back in here, 109.1, swap that over. Now the ILS is set. Now we should set these on both radios. Where they're good to go. Okay, and if you had a missed approach VOR or something else you could put in, you might throw that into the navigational radio on the standby in case you had to hit that particular section. Now, the next thing that we are going to do, and this is the part that takes absolutely forever. We should be good to actually turn that TCAS back on, come to think of it. Let me back up here. Let's turn the TCAS back on. We should be fine. So the next thing we're going to do is set the minimums on the primary flight display. So you're going to get that from the approach plate. We have our ILS or decision height, which this is going to be our radar altitude, which is 200 feet, or the barometric, which is 6,387 feet. This is going to take forever to enter, but it's the way it got to go. So we're going to type in or enter 6387, and it's going to go right here under our baros and our minimums. And by simply turning this knob up here, you guys can see that number is changing, and so I will catch you guys when we reach the 6387. All right, so we finally got that in our minimums, and the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to set our target altitude. Now what we want to do here is we want to go back to our approach plate, and we want to find the initial fix for our approach. And that should be this guy here with the asterisk here, so you can see that the initial fix here should be at 8,700 feet. Or you can do the start of the approach, which is Mogul, but I like using the IF. So we're going to actually do 8,700 on this particular one. So let's go ahead and lock that in. Come back over here. And again, we're just going to set that down. What will happen now is, as long as we don't touch anything and the aircraft is fully configured and everything's good to go, once we reach the top of descent point here, the aircraft will automatically begin descending at the point that it reaches that location, as long as we have this altitude below our current cruise altitude. And if you absolutely necessarily need to, you can come right here and select the Descend Now button, but we're still 105 miles away, so that would be descending far too early, and the aircraft will step down and honor any of the altitude restrictions that are currently in place. So I'll catch you guys once we reach that top of descent, and then I'll catch you guys probably about the time we hit the initial fix. Alright, so we are just about at that top of descent. Let's see where exactly we are. We are 1 mile away from it. So we've already got our altitude set, got our configuration set, FMC's been programmed. We just passed the top of descent. You should see the thrust start to roll back, which it is. There's our vertical speed descending now. Altitude is now decreasing. We are on our way down. So, just as before, at 18,000 feet, we will be sure to set our current barometric pressure down here using the barometric pressure knob. We will also make sure that at 10,000 feet that we have our landing lights turned off, and the aircraft, again, will be following the flight restrictions, the altitude restrictions that we looked at in the legs page earlier. So you can see we already have Lamar here in magenta at flight level 280. The magenta indicates that there is a restriction at that particular location, which we're also able to see here. So where I'm going to see you guys again is at 14,000 feet when we reach, what was that? I don't remember what the waypoint was. Stand by. At Aussie, ironically enough. So when we get to Aussie, actually, you know what? No, I'm going to see you guys when we get to Addon. When we get to Addon, I'm going to see you guys as we start to turn on to the initial fix for the approach, and we start configuring the aircraft for landing, because at this point, the only thing we're going to do is we're going to manage those speeds. The aircraft already knows that it has to be restricted at 250 knots by 14,000 feet. It already knows all the altitude restrictions, so I'm just going to let it ride itself all the way down until we get down to where we need to be, where we start configuring the aircraft to land. So I'll see you guys in a few. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we are just about at it. So we're down at 14,000 feet, as you guys can see here. Here are the rings that we created. There's our 15-mile ring, our 10-mile ring, and our 5-mile ring. So this is just a nice visual indicator of where we need to be based on each ring. So the 15-mile mark is where we'll start really making sure the aircraft is slowed down and that we're good to start configuring at 10 miles. 10 miles we'll start dropping flaps. By 5 miles we want to make sure gear's down, we're stable, all that good jazz, and then lined up for the approach. So it's really nice visual indicators. Now, oftentimes, as we get to the initial fix, when people start like, oh no, we gotta start slowing down. Now think about how long this one is. We're not going to worry about, or not the initial fix, excuse me, at the start of the approach. The Addon is the transition point onto the approach, but then we just have to go through all of these alpha Foxtrot locations here. Mogul is actually the initial fix. That's where we actually turn final onto the approach, and that's where we'll start configuring the aircraft for landing. Now you can see here we have now passed Aussie, so we're below the 14,000 foot restriction. So what our goal is here is to get on that 8,700 foot mark here at Mogul to make sure that we are set for our approach. And actually, let me double check that here, because I'm thinking that I actually confused myself and I'm not paying attention. No, we need to be at 10,000 feet by Mogul. So let's go ahead and just set that back up. I'm going to lock that back in. I realized what I did. That was my fault. I was reading that wrong. So we want the start of the approach for the sake of the tutorial guide. Oh my gosh, it even has a red box around it and I ignored it. I don't know why. Okay, well, we'll just forget that that happened. Anyway, that happens. You can see this green arc here. This lets us know where we should reach our targeted altitude. So you can see we're just about on course for Mogul when you actually turn the aircraft here. So we got plenty of time, plenty of speed. Everything's looking really good. I'm going to go ahead and set my barometric pressure again as we start getting lower. I'll set it again at 10,000 feet and probably again at 5,000 feet just to make sure that we're locked in correctly. But everything else is set. We have our flaps configuration. We're using 30 at 144 knots. And you can see that sitting right there. That's our target reference speeds. We have our barometric minimum set, so we know what our minimums are at 6,387 feet mean sea level. We'll get that minimums call, letting us know that it's time to decide whether or not we're continuing or going missed approach. And everything else is looking absolutely gorgeous. Transponders are set. ILS is set. Let's see here. We can actually set, well, we're still way ahead of time, but we can go ahead and set our auto brakes now. We're going to be using auto brakes medium, so basically 2. We have a pretty long runway that we're landing on. We shouldn't need maximum auto brakes by any means. We got plenty of time here. Everything else is actually just looking good. Just a matter of chilling here for a minute. I'll catch you guys as we get to Mogul. All right, so as we have turned on to our base leg, is what we'll call this essentially, I am going to start taking over a little bit here. We're going to go to speed intervention, and I'm going to slow the aircraft down to 200 knots. I do like taking control of the aircraft manually from this point for most of the functions here. The other thing that I'm going to do here, as we have already locked onto the ILS, you can see that right up here. The ILS is named and identified, as well as the final approach course. I'm going to go ahead and hit the approach mode. Should get the aircraft tracking the glide slopes. You can see there's the glide slope and VOR localizer. And we'll wait for those to start locking up here. It'll continue to fly its path until it locks onto those. We want to start slowing the aircraft down a little bit here. We're still at 11,000 feet, but remember what I said, when you're learning, try to stay ahead of the game. We're going to go ahead and turn those landing lights on now, as well as the runway turn-off lights and the taxi light. Get all those ready to go for us. We're going to set the engines back into continuous as far as the engine start switches go, just to make sure that if there's any issue, we are set. Make sure that your seatbelt signs are already on, and chime the cab and let them know that we're getting ready to land again. All right, looking good. Speed's looking good. We're coming down to where we need to be. I'm going to go ahead and go flaps 1. Just sort of help control that just a little bit here. I'm going to arm the speed brakes now. I don't think that we'll need them if I do what I need to do correctly. There we go. Speed brakes are armed. Auto brakes are set, so we're good there. Leading edge flaps are extended. We have our ground speed now indicating here at the bottom left. And as we turn, we should lock onto the localizer. We'll see. You'll normally pick up the localizer between 17 and 25 miles out, somewhere. That depends on the localizer. Usually that's when we'll pick it up. Has been identified, we just haven't locked onto it yet. And there it is, boom. So the VOR localizer has now locked on. The glide slope will be next. There is our VOR, or our lateral navigation diamond. Now we're turning on to final. So this is 15 miles out. This is where we really need to start setting the aircraft up for our approach. This is where things start happening pretty quickly. And we're at our 200 mile an hour mark, or 200 knot mark. At this point now, I'm going to start slowing the aircraft down to about 160 knots. Again, staying ahead for tutorial purposes. But normally I would start doing all this right about 11, 12 miles. So we're about 3 miles ahead of the game here. But trust me, it will make things quite a bit easier. And there's our runway right out there. There's our glide slope diamond right there. So once this diamond reaches our current altitude line, you'll start to see that come down. All right, so we're going to go flaps 2 at 180 knots. Going for flaps 5 at 180 knots. We're going to set our escape altitude, which is 8,200 feet. Let me actually double check that on the chart, make sure I didn't just lie to you guys. Missed approach altitude, sorry, is 7,200 feet. 7,200 feet, I'm sorry. It's off by 1,000 feet there. 7,200 feet is our missed approach initial altitude. Alright, glide slope now locked in. The aircraft's descending according to the glide slope. We're locked onto the ILS. We're already past flaps 5. We're going to go flaps 10. We're going to bring the gear down. We're a little ahead of schedule. Like I said, we're still about 12 miles out, but in the interest of giving you guys plenty of time. When you're learning, give yourself plenty of time. I cannot stress that enough. It will make things so much easier. Don't try to be the professional badass pilot right out of the gate. Give yourself time. Once you're on final, yeah, that's a good time. You don't want to be like making the turn way back there like we were, all fully configured. But, you know, give yourself about 5 miles extra while you're learning and then start slowly reducing that. Like I said, ideally we should be starting this process, flaps down speed reduction, right about 10 miles. But at that point it happens very, very quickly, so it makes it hard to do tutorial like that. Simply because it just happens so fast. I want you guys to have time to follow along with me if that's what you're doing. Alright, going to reduce our speed down to our reference speed. And we got a nice headwind today, which is good. I was worried about landing with a tailwind and screwing things up. We're going to go flaps 15, flaps 25. And finally now we're going to go ahead and look for reference flaps 30. So flaps fully configured, landing gear is down, lights are set. Cabin's been notified, seatbelt signs are on, auto brakes are set, engine start switches are in the continuous mode, speed brakes spoilers are armed, gear is down and locked. We're good to go. ILS is set, we are stable. Customary screenshot of the approach. Check. Alright, grabbing it now. Customary approach screenshot has been acquired. So from this point down, it's just a matter of flying the aircraft down to the ground until we disengage the autopilot. I'll normally disengage the autopilot between 5 and 2 miles from the approach, but it really depends on you and how badassery of a captain you want to be. Today, I'm sort of going to keep things a little bit lower. Now, we can also, if we want, bring down the HUD. Look at that glide slope just right on par there. I need to bring my camera down a little bit. I don't think I have my camera quite... There we go. This part can be a little... Some of this stuff needs adjusting still. There we go. There's all of our information. I don't think I've ever tried using the HUD. So we have indicated airspeed up here. Let's see what this is. Looks like maybe our altitude. Are we at 5.6? That can't be right. Maybe AOA. I'm not sure what that is yet. That's going to be bank angle. There's our altitude. 7,100. It's going to be radar altimeter, I believe. It's our vertical descent rate, distance to the runway, ground speed. Alright, well, let's do this. Disengaging autopilot. There we go, let's fly it in the rest of the way ourselves. I don't think I've ever used the HUD, so bear with me, guys. It's kind of interesting. On visual approach now. Ooh. She's sensitive. Going a little low. Pull that nose up a bit.
Glide slow.
Yeah. Adding some power back in. There we go. So we're a little low on the glide slope. I lost a little bit there. We're still good.
100. 50. 30.
Throttles to idle. Oof, bounced. Alright, reverses if you're going to use reversers until 80 knots. We're just letting her slow down. We got, like I said, tons of runway, and I found very seldom in the simulator to actually need them. Ground speed 90 knots. There's 80. I don't know how I feel about the HUD. That was kind of weird. It's kind of what screwed me up. I don't know why. I don't know how I felt about that. I don't know. Alright, so let's go ahead and get off the active here. Come on, baby. No, we're not going to take off. I went above 40%. That's why I did that. Okay, now normally your first officer would be taking care of a lot of this stuff, or whoever was the pilot in command. So we're going to go ahead and exit here, and then we'll address the other issues here. Alright, so we want to make sure... Ooh, come on. Nope. Whoa, turning that way too fast. There we go. Need to get over to the terminals. So, we clear the runway first. Once we are completely clear of the runway, since it's just us, then we're going to turn off our landing lights, turn off the runway turn-off lights, taxi lights can stay on, engine start switches can go to the off position. We're going to go ahead and start the APU in case for whatever reason you don't have ground power when you get to your ramp or your gate. Strobe lights are going to go to steady. We can turn our external lights off, logo lights come off, wheel well lights come off. We have pretty gorgeous weather here. At this point, you can take your pressurization knob and take it down to 0, or I think it stops at 100. Oh, 0. And same thing with our landing elevation. You can take that down now. And again, this stuff where you got to remember, normally there'd be 2 of you to help you with this particular portion, so there we go. All right. And that's it for the moment. We're going to go ahead and clean the flaps up. Make sure auto brake is set to off. And make sure our spoilers have in fact disarmed. All right. And we can go ahead and start taxiing to our gate. And let's set our altitude down to ground level. Go. And from here, we'll just taxi to our gate, park the aircraft. Okay, so we have an abundance of Cessnas sitting at the gates. So we're just going to sort of wing it. Come on. Well, go! And let's turn the taxi light off as we turn towards the gate so we don't blind our marshaller if we had one. And we're just sort of winging it. We're just going to stop it here. And we're going to set our parking brake. And immediately, we're going to switch our gen over to the APU. And then we're going to come on down, if I can find the right camera view, and turn our engines off. There we go. Make sure all of our exterior lights are off accordingly. Anti-collision light can now come off. Exterior lights can come off. At this point, all right, let's already make sure everything's already set. So engine start switches need to be in the off position. Cutoff switch we've already set. Flaps we've already verified are in their 0 position. And all exterior lights we have set. Engine bleeds, we're going to go ahead and leave them on APU bleed. Make sure they are turned off. The packs, if you're going to be in a turnaround state, you can leave them in the auto position. Same thing with the recirculation fans, they can stay in auto as well, unless you're going cold and dark. If you're going cold and dark, you would want to turn those off. Let's go ahead and contact the ground crew and get them to get our jetway. Oh, we have an inhibit. Oh, let's see here. Let's set those. Set the wheel chocks. Once the wheel chocks are set, we can then request the jetway be brought over to the aircraft. Clear the master caution. Coming back up top here, let's start taking a look at some things here. The transponder, I think, was the one thing that we did miss. Gosh darn it, where the heck is it? Yep, I did miss that. Should have set that to just transponder once we exited the runway. I knew I did forget something there. Once again, getting bit by not using my own guide, which was the whole purpose of the flight. Let's go ahead and switch on over to ground power. At this point, we should be able to turn the APU off if ground power is truly available. Set our electric hydraulic pumps back to off. All window heats go to the off position. And we can turn our fuel pumps off as well at this point. APU, set that to the off position. Already was. Good. And yaw dampers, you can see automatically return to the off position. Yes, I know we're worried about the IRS. IRS, don't worry about it. We're about to turn you off as well. Stepping upstairs, IRS goes to the off position. That's what's beeping at us there. Turn our dome light back to the off position. Master caution's cleared. I don't think we had ground power is what happened there. That's why it's doing that. Go figure. And we'll turn the seat belt and passenger signs also to the off position. People can now get up. Set your electrical power as desired. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and disarm the emergency exit lights. We're going to turn off the standby power. Turn the battery off. And exit our aircraft. I hope you all found this video useful. It was different. There were definitely some changes that I do have to make for the 737-800 guide. However, for the most part, they are pretty identical, so I should be able to put a guide for this particular version of the aircraft out within this week. The 787 guide is still coming along. It's just been sort of challenging as the aspect that the aircraft unfortunately does not fly according to real-world specifications that I can find, even though some of that documentation is actually a little hard to get a hold of. Go figure, right? So, just bear with me, guys. Thank you for all the continued support and love. I truly appreciate it. As always, stay safe and healthy, and I will see you in the next one.